The sirens screamed through Maple Heights as Karen Whitman stood triumphant on her manicured lawn. Watching 3 police cruisers surround her neighbor's property, she'd finally done it. Exposed the illegal construction that had been ruining her pristine neighborhood for months. But as the lead officer approached the construction crew with a clipboard in hand, Karen's smile began to fade. The worker wasn't being arrested, he was shaking the officer's hand. And when the demolition permit fluttered to the ground, revealing the city's official seal and tomorrow's date, Karen realized she'd just made the Karen Whitman had lived at 1247 Maple Heights Drive for exactly 17 years, 4 months, and 12 days. She knew this because she kept meticulous records of everything from the quarterly HOA meetings, where she served as secretary-treasurer, to the precise angles at which her neighbors' trash cans were positioned every Tuesday morning. Her 2-story colonial sat like a monument to suburban perfection. Its cream-colored siding pressure-washed monthly, its emerald lawn maintained with military precision. Every blade of grass stood at regulation height, every flower bed bordered with laser-straight edges that she measured with an actual ruler. But perfection, Karen had learned, required constant vigilance. She pressed her face against the kitchen window's pristine glass, her breath fogging the surface as she peered through the wooden fence that separated her property from the Hendersons' backyard. The sound that had woken her at precisely 6:47 a.m. was still echoing across the neighborhood, the metallic screech of heavy machinery, the rumble of diesel engines, and worst of all, the careless laughter of construction workers who clearly had no respect for the sanctity of a residential zone. 17 years, she muttered, her perfectly manicured fingernails drumming against the granite countertop. 17 years of building this neighborhood's reputation, and they're going to destroy it in a single morning. The Hendersons had moved in 3 months ago, a young couple in their 30s, with dirt under their fingernails and dreams that apparently didn't include following proper building codes. Tom Henderson worked as some kind of contractor, which Karen had immediately identified as a red flag. His wife Sarah taught elementary school, which would have been respectable if she hadn't insisted on painting their front door that garish shade of turquoise that violated at least 3 HOA aesthetic guidelines. But the pool was the final straw. Karen had first noticed the surveyor's flags 6 weeks ago. Little orange triangles stabbed into the Hendersons' backyard like tiny declarations of war. She'd immediately researched the proper protocols, spending hours on the county website, memorizing permit requirements and setback regulations. When the excavation began 2 weeks later, without a single official notice posted on the property, she knew she had them. The construction noise grew louder, and Karen grabbed her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd been documenting for weeks. Concrete trucks arriving before 7 a.m., workers using profanity that could be heard 3 houses away, equipment parked on the street without proper permits. She had enough evidence to shut down this operation and maybe even get the Hendersons fined enough to reconsider their life choices. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor across the street, Dolores Martinez. "Did you see they're working again? Thought you said you were handling it." Karen's jaw tightened. The entire neighborhood was watching, waiting to see if she would follow through on her promise to maintain their property values. She walked to her home office, where color-coded binders lined the shelves like soldiers at attention. Her neighborhood documentation binder was 3 inches thick, filled with photos, printed emails, and highlighted copies of city ordinances. She pulled out her laptop and opened the document she'd been crafting for weeks. Formal complaint regarding illegal construction at 1249 Maple Heights Drive. The complaint was thorough, professional, and damning. She'd documented every violation, cross-referenced every code, and even included a spreadsheet showing how the construction noise exceeded acceptable decibel levels during residential quiet hours. This wasn't just about the pool, it was about preserving the character of their community. But as she reached for her phone to call the city's code enforcement office, another sound joined the construction chaos. Karen rushed back to the kitchen window and saw Tom Henderson setting up speakers near the construction site, apparently turning the illegal pool installation into some kind of party. "That's it," she said aloud, her voice sharp with righteous indignation. "That's absolutely it." She dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Karen Whitman at 1247 Maple Heights Drive. I need to report an illegal construction operation that's disturbing the peace and violating multiple city ordinances. Ma'am, is anyone in immediate danger? The immediate danger is to our entire neighborhood's quality of life. These people are operating heavy machinery without proper permits, creating excessive noise during restricted hours. And ma'am, non-emergency violations should be reported to the "This is an emergency." Karen's voice rose, her composure cracking. They've been doing this for weeks, and no one is stopping them. The whole neighborhood is suffering because of their illegal activity. If you don't send someone immediately, I'll be forced to contact the mayor's office directly. There was a pause on the line. Karen could hear the dispatcher typing. Units are being dispatched to investigate a noise complaint at 1249 Maple Heights Drive. Thank you. Karen hung up, satisfaction warming her chest like morning coffee. She returned to her observation post at the kitchen window, watching the construction crew work. Tom Henderson was operating some kind of jackhammer, breaking up concrete near what looked like the deep end of their illegal swimming pool. His wife Sarah was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding inside to avoid being associated with this disaster when the police arrived. Karen's phone buzzed again. Another text from Dolores heard sirens. "Did you call the cops?" She typed back, "Justice is coming." Within minutes, the sound of sirens grew louder, and Karen felt a surge of vindication. 3 police cruisers turned onto Maple Heights Drive, their red and blue lights painting the pristine neighborhood in alternating colors of authority. She smoothed her blouse and prepared to give her statement, mentally rehearsing the key points of her complaint. Officer Miguel Santos was the first to approach the Henderson property. Karen had dealt with him before during a previous neighborhood incident involving the Williams family's unauthorized fence expansion. He was thorough, professional, and most importantly, he understood the importance of maintaining community standards. Karen stepped onto her front porch, ready to provide context and documentation, but something unexpected happened. Instead of immediately confronting the construction crew, Officer Santos walked calmly toward Tom Henderson, who had shut off his equipment and was pulling off his work gloves. The 2 men shook hands. Karen's confidence wavered. This wasn't how arrests were supposed to begin. She moved closer to her property line, straining to hear their conversation over the idle rumble of the construction equipment. "Morning, Tom," Officer Santos said. "Got a call about excessive noise. Everything on schedule." "Right on track, Miguel. Should be finished with the demo by noon, just like we discussed." "Demo." Karen's mind raced. "What demo?" Officer Santos pulled out a clipboard and handed it to Tom, who signed something with practiced efficiency. As Tom handed the clipboard back, a piece of paper slipped free and fluttered to the ground near Karen's fence. She crept closer, her heart beginning to pound for reasons she couldn't quite identify. The paper had landed face up, and even from several feet away, she could make out an official city seal at the top. "Demolition permit," she read silently, her lips moving as she processed the words. 1249 Maple Heights Drive, scheduled for June 30th, 2025. June 30th, tomorrow. The world seemed to tilt slightly as Karen stared at the permit. This wasn't an illegal pool installation. This was an authorized demolition of an existing structure. They were tearing something down. Officer Santos was already walking back toward his cruiser, apparently satisfied that everything was in order. The other 2 patrol cars were beginning to pull away, their emergency lights switching off as they returned to their regular duties. If this was a scheduled demolition, then every photo she'd taken, every complaint she'd documented, every righteous phone call she'd made to neighbors and city officials had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. But that couldn't be right. She was Karen Whitman. She didn't make mistakes about neighborhood issues. She was the one who caught the Martinez family's unpermitted deck expansion in 2019. She was the one who identified the Williams family's fence violation in 2022. She was the guardian of Maple Heights Drive. Tom Henderson walked over to where the permit had fallen and picked it up, glancing in Karen's direction. "Karen, what's going on?" Dolores Martinez stood at the property line, her perfectly styled silver hair catching the morning sun as she waited for an explanation that Karen couldn't give. Karen's voice caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of 17 years of neighborhood authority crumbling beneath her feet. "It's not what I thought." "What do you mean, it's not what you thought?" You said they were breaking every code in the book. You showed me the photos, the noise violations, they have permits. The words came out like a confession. Official. Permits. From the city? Dolores blinked, her expression shifting from anticipation to confusion. Permits for what? You said they were installing an illegal pool. They're not installing. Karen's gaze drifted back to Tom Henderson, who was now directing a crew member operating a small excavator. They're removing. There was already a pool here, a dangerous one that the previous owners never properly filled. The silence stretched, between them like a chasm. Karen could practically hear Dolores recalibrating every conversation they'd had over the past 6 weeks, every shared moment of outrage, every promise that Karen would handle the situation. So you called 911, Dolores said slowly, to report legal construction work. I didn't know, Karen. Dolores's voice carried a tone Karen had never heard before disappointment, mixed with something that sounded uncomfortably like pity. How did you not know? Didn't you talk to them? Didn't you ask what they were doing before you launched your crusade? The question hit like a slap. In all her weeks of documentation and complaint filing, Karen had never once walked across the property line to have an actual conversation with her new neighbors. She'd observed, analyzed, and judged from a distance, building her case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. I was protecting the neighborhood, Karen said weakly. From what? People making their property safer. Before Karen could respond, more neighbors began to gather. Word was spreading quickly through the informal network of morning dog walkers and coffee drinkers who formed the backbone of Maple Heights' gossip infrastructure. Mrs. Patterson and her husband Jim approached from the east, while the Williams family emerged from their house across the street. Morning, ladies, Jim Patterson called out as he approached. Quite a show this morning. Police cars, construction crews, feels like we're living in downtown now. Karen felt her cheeks burn. Jim Patterson had always been skeptical of her neighborhood, oversight activities, and now she'd given him ammunition that would last for years. Just a misunderstanding, Karen said, trying to project an authority she no longer felt. Misunderstanding about what? This from Janet Williams, who had crossed the street with her teenage daughter Emma in tow. Emma said she saw you on your porch when the police arrived. She thought you looked pretty pleased with yourself. Emma Williams, 16, and blessed with the brutal honesty of youth, nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, you were like standing there with your arms crossed, looking all triumphant and stuff, like you'd just solved a murder or something. Emma, her mother warned, but the damage was done. Karen could see the pieces clicking into place in her neighbors' minds. The realization that she'd been the one to call the police, and that whatever she'd reported hadn't resulted in any arrests or work stoppages. Tom Henderson chose that moment. To shut off his equipment and walk toward, the group gathered near Karen's property line. He moved with the confident stride of someone who had nothing to hide, and Karen felt a fresh wave of mortification as she realized he was coming to explain the situation to neighbors. She'd spent weeks turning against him. Morning, everyone, Tom said, pulling off his work gloves as he approached. Sorry about the early start and all the noise. We're on a tight timeline to get this old pool removed before the safety inspection next week. Safety inspection? Dolores asked. Yeah, when we had the property surveyed after we bought the house, we discovered the previous owners had just covered over their old pool instead of properly filling it. The whole thing was basically a sinkhole waiting to happen. Could have been a real liability if someone's kid fell through the covering or if the cavity caused foundation problems. Karen watched as understanding dawned on her neighbors' faces. What she'd been portraying for weeks as reckless construction was actually responsible home ownership. The Hendersons weren't disrupting the neighborhood, they were protecting it. That must be expensive, Jim Patterson observed. About 12 grand, Tom said with a rueful smile. Not exactly how we wanted to spend our first summer in the new house, but it's the right thing to do. Plus, once it's properly filled and graded, we'll have a nice level yard for our kids to play in. Kids? Janet Williams's expression softened. I didn't know you had children. Sarah's pregnant, Tom said, his face lighting up with pride. Due in October. We wanted to get all the safety issues handled before the baby arrives. The group made appropriate congratulatory noises, and Karen felt herself becoming smaller with each passing moment. Not only had she been wrong about the construction, but she'd been actively working against a young couple who were preparing For their first child, the photos she'd taken, the complaints she'd filed, the neighbors she'd rallied, all of it directed at people who were simply trying to make their home safe for their growing family. "Well, congratulations," Dolores said, warmly. "And thank you for taking care of that pool situation, property values and all." "Actually," Tom said, glancing toward Karen's house, "I should probably apologize to Mrs. Whitman. I know the noise has been disruptive, and I should have done a better job communicating what we were doing. I meant to introduce myself when we moved in, but work kept me busy, and then the pool situation became urgent." The group turned to look at Karen, who felt like a specimen under a microscope. Tom Henderson was apologizing to her. The man she'd spent weeks trying to get arrested was taking responsibility for her misunderstanding and offering an apology he didn't owe. Double quotes, Karen began, but her voice failed her. How could she explain that she'd never given him a chance to introduce himself, that she'd made assumptions and built a case without ever attempting to understand the situation? That her idea of being a good neighbor was surveillance and complaint filing rather than actual neighborly communication. "It's fine," she managed, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Tom's expression was kind but knowing. "I saw the photos you were taking," he said gently, "and I heard you made some calls to the city. I understand if I didn't know what was going on, I'd probably be concerned too. Heavy machinery at 7 a.m. isn't exactly what anyone wants to wake up to." The casual mention of her documentation efforts sent another wave of humiliation through Karen. He'd known she was watching, photographing, building a case against him, and he was still treating her with more courtesy than she'd shown him. "Photos?" Emma Williams asked, her teenage radar immediately honing in on the most interesting detail. "What kind of photos?" "Emma, don't," her mother warned, but it was too late. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen could feel every eye on her, waiting for her response. She could deflect, make excuses, or try to justify her actions as responsible neighborhood oversight. But standing there in the morning sun, surrounded by neighbors who were beginning to understand the scope of her mistake, she found herself facing a moment of terrible clarity. She had been watching Tom Henderson like a criminal for weeks. She had documented his every move, questioned his every action, and built a case designed to stop him from making his property safe for his pregnant wife and future child. She had turned what should have been a welcome to the neighborhood into a campaign of suspicion and hostility. And now, faced with his kindness and his neighbors' growing understanding of the situation, Karen Whitman, Secretary-Treasurer of the Maple Heights HOA, guardian of property values, protector of community standards, had to confront an uncomfortable truth about herself. She wasn't protecting her neighborhood, she was controlling it, and there was a difference. "I was documenting what I thought were code violations," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong." The admission seemed to echo. In the morning air, Jim Patterson cleared his throat awkwardly. Dolores studied her shoes. Even Emma Williams, never at a loss for words, seemed struck silent by the weight of Karen's confession. Tom Henderson, however, stepped forward with an expression of genuine sympathy. "Hey, it happens," he said. "When we bought this place, I thought the Kowalskis had just let their landscaping go. Took me 3 weeks to realize that weird soft spot in the backyard was actually a covered pool. If I'd been watching from across the fence, I probably would have thought we were crazy too, tearing up a perfectly good yard." His generosity made everything worse. Karen felt tears, threatening actual tears, something she hadn't experienced in public since her mother's funeral 8 years ago. This man, this young father-to-be whom she'd tried to have arrested, was offering her a graceful exit from her humiliation. But grace, Karen was beginning to realize, required accepting it. And acceptance meant acknowledging not just that she'd been wrong about this specific situation, but that her entire approach to neighborhood relations might need examination. "I should have introduced myself when you move." Karen stared at her phone screen for a full minute before typing, "I made a mistake, a big one. Tom Henderson is doing legitimate permitted work to remove a dangerous hidden pool. I called 911 based on wrong assumptions. I owe him and Sarah an apology, and I owe all of you an explanation." She hit send before she could change her mind. Watching as the message delivered to the neighborhood group chat she'd created 2 years ago for important community updates. Jim Patterson called 911. Jesus, Karen, Janet Williams. Those poor people. They're having a baby. The messages kept coming, each one a small knife twist of consequence. Karen silenced her phone and walked inside, needing distance from the demolition sounds that now felt like a soundtrack to her humiliation. Her house, usually a sanctuary of control and order, felt different somehow. The color-coded binders on her office shelves looked less like organization and more like obsession. The detailed notes about her neighbors' activities seemed less like community protection and more like surveillance. Even her immaculate living room, with its perfectly aligned throw pillows and dust-free surfaces, felt sterile and cold. She made coffee with shaking hands, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 2 hours, she'd gone from being the neighborhood's respected authority figure to being the woman who called 911. On a pregnant couple removing a safety hazard from their yard, the coffee was bitter, but she drank it anyway. Standing at her kitchen window and watching Tom Henderson work, what she'd interpreted as reckless destruction was actually methodical, professional work. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed City Hall Code Enforcement. Mrs. Whitman. This is Janet Chen from Code Enforcement. I have several complaint forms on file with your signature regarding 1249 Maple Heights Drive. Karen's stomach dropped. Yes, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm calling because we received a police report about this morning's incident, and I wanted to clarify our records. The property owner, Thomas Henderson, has all the appropriate permits for pool removal and site remediation. His permits were approved 6 weeks ago, and we have copies of all required inspections and safety protocols. 6 weeks ago, Karen's mind raced backward. 6 weeks ago was when she'd first noticed the surveyor's flags. Tom Henderson had been following proper procedures from the very beginning, while she'd been building a case against him based on her own ignorance of those procedures. Mrs. Whitman, are you there? Yes, I'm here. I want to withdraw my complaints. That's what I'm calling about, given that your complaints appear to be based on incorrect information. And considering this morning's police response, I need to inform you that filing false reports with our office is a serious matter. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. False reports. Your complaints alleged multiple code violations, including unpermitted construction, improper noise ordinances, and safety hazards. All of these allegations appear to be contradicted by the permits on file and the legitimate nature of Mr. Henderson's work. While I understand this may have been unintentional, the city takes false reporting seriously, especially when it results in unnecessary emergency response calls. Karen sank into a kitchen chair, her perfect world continuing to crumble around her. What does that mean? It means we'll be reviewing your complaints as part of our false reporting protocol. Depending on our findings, there could be fines involved. You'll receive a formal notice within the next week. After hanging up, Karen sat in her silent kitchen, staring at the phone. Fines official sanctions, her name would be on record with the city as someone who filed false complaints. The woman who'd spent 17 years building a reputation as the neighborhood's protector was about to become officially documented as a nuisance. The doorbell rang. Karen considered not answering, but the shadow visible through her frosted glass door was distinctly feminine and persistent. She opened the door to find Sarah Henderson standing on her front porch, very obviously pregnant, and holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. Mrs. Whitman, I'm Sarah Henderson, Tom's wife. Karen felt her face flush with fresh shame. Sarah Henderson was younger than she'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes and the sort of natural beauty that didn't require the careful maintenance Karen had always thought necessary. Her pregnancy was clearly showing, and she looked tired but determined. I wanted to thank you, Sarah said. Thank me. Karen's voice came out as a croak. For caring about the neighborhood Tom told me about this morning and about the concerns you've had about our construction work. I know it must have seemed disruptive and concerning, especially without context. Karen stared at her, speechless. Sarah Henderson was thanking her. The pregnant woman whose husband she'd tried to have arrested was standing on her doorstep with what appeared to be baked goods, expressing gratitude. I brought you some muffins, Sarah continued. Blueberry. I stress bake, and we've been pretty stressed about getting this pool situation resolved before the baby comes. You don't understand, Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. I called the police on your husband. I filed complaints with the city. I spent weeks trying to get your construction work stopped. I know, Sarah said simply, but you did. It because you thought you were protecting everyone. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to appreciate. The kindness in her voice was unbearable. Karen felt tears threatening again, and she didn't trust herself to speak. The thing is, Sarah continued, we're going to be neighbors for a long time. Our baby will grow up playing in yards up and down this street. Tom and I want to be part of this community, and we want our child to feel safe and welcome here. That requires people who care enough to pay attention, even if they don't always have all the information. But I was wrong about everything. You were wrong about us, specifically. But you weren't wrong about wanting to protect your neighborhood. You just need better information sources. Sarah smiled, and Karen realized this young woman possessed a kind of wisdom that had nothing to do with age or experience, and everything to do with fundamental decency. Why are you being so nice to me? Karen asked. Because Tom grew up in a neighborhood where nobody cared about anything. Houses falling apart, yards full of trash, kids getting into trouble because no adults were paying attention. He always said when we bought our own house, he wanted neighbors who gave a damn, even if they gave a damn in the wrong direction sometimes. Sarah held out the plate of muffins, and Karen took it with trembling hands. Also, Sarah added with a grin, I figured if I was going to have a baby in October, I'd probably want the help of experienced neighbors who know how to organize and get things done. Tom says you run the HOA like a military operation. That's exactly what new parents needs. Someone who can coordinate meal trains in emergency, babysitters, and all the stuff that keeps a community functioning. The comment was clearly meant as a compliment, but it hit Karen in an unexpected way. Sarah saw her organizational skills as assets to the community, not as instruments of control. She saw Karen's attention to detail as potential helpfulness, not nosiness. I don't know how to be a different kind of neighbor, Karen admitted. You don't have to be different, Sarah said. You just have to be informed. Next time you see something that concerns you, maybe start with a conversation instead of documentation. Most people are happy to explain what they're doing if someone asks nicely. As Sarah walked back toward her house, Karen remained on her front porch, holding a plate of muffins made by a woman she'd spent weeks trying to harm. The irony was staggering. The person she'd seen as a threat to her, neighborhood's values, was teaching her what neighborly values actually looked like. Her phone buzzed with another message in the group chat. This one from Jim Patterson. Karen, we all make mistakes. The question is what you do next. What she did next. Karen looked across the street at her neighbors' houses, thinking about all the assumptions she'd made over the years, all the times she'd chosen observation over conversation, documentation over communication. How many other situations had she misunderstood? How many opportunities for genuine connection had she missed while focused on maintaining control? The sound of machinery had stopped. Karen looked toward the Henderson property and saw Tom directing the removal of a large section of concrete. What had been hidden beneath the innocent-looking yard was now fully exposed a cracked, deteriorating pool shell that could have collapsed at any moment, potentially taking part of the foundation with it. The danger had been real. Hadn't been creating a problem, he'd been solving one that could have affected every house on the block. Karen walked back inside and opened her laptop. She had emails to write to the city, withdrawing her complaints and accepting responsibility for the false reports. To her neighbors, explaining what had really happened and apologizing for the drama she'd created. To the HOA board, acknowledging her mistake and its potential impact on her role as secretary-treasurer. But first, she opened a new document and began typing. Letter of apology to Tom Ann.